So I wanted to look today a little bit about the design process, and that's part of what designers use. It's what we work with. It's how we come from starting a project to finishing a project, and there's some stages that we look through. So we'll look through some of the bigger components as well as some of the smaller steps within that. The process that we normally look at is this, and we have along the top, define, ideate, develop, and execute. And you can see there's sub things to work on. We're not going to, as our first graphic design class, we're not going to look into each one of these items at the bottom. This is something you'll see if you're in our program. You'll look at in typography, you'll look at in graphic design 150, and then the final graphic design class as well. And so what we're going to get into with this next project, with this time, is look at defining and doing some understanding of the problem. We're looking at who we're creating for, and we're looking for some development, what the design brief is, and going and kind of coming up with a plan. And here's what we're going to actually think about. Second stage is ideate, and we look at some of the smaller sections within that, and then we actually build it, and then we give it testing and send it out, publish it, and then look at the information related to it and measure it. Was it successful or not? So just some basics related to this process: define, ideate, develop, and execute. And those are our 4 stages. All right. So I'll dig into each one of those a little bit. So if we look at define, and we're thinking about just familiarizing yourself with things, with understanding the problem, understanding the business, the client, what we're creating, and who we are creating for. Some questions that you often ask with this is, in what realm are we working? What are we developing? Or what's the intent? What's the plan? We might go a different direction, but what's the plan? What are the little details that we need to know? Who are we creating for? And thinking about what's been done in the past and how we look ahead for that. Also thinking about our budget deadline, when is it due, and how much money can we spend if necessary. Okay. To understand a little bit about the audience, we have to think about who we are sending the message to, and the audience is not the client. They are creating something that needs to get shared or promoted or opened up to their audience, and they need to understand that, and you need to understand that as well. And sometimes I've had experiences with the audience being the client, and that's not really the purpose. So quick questions, and you can think about these as you're working. Who's the audience for this? Might be something related to it's pizza, obviously, but who's the audience? And I'm not going to tell you right or wrong, just something we have as a discussion. Who's the audience for this? Different than the audience plaque there, probably, but who's the audience? Who's the audience for this? Each audience is different, and we can get as specific and detailed as we want, because everybody has little pieces that they bring into their life that might influence some of the decisions you make, and you might be the audience of something with this and with a group of people that you know, and then you might go in a different area and you're an audience for that. So it might be that you do overnight oats. I'm in that group. And then I also like a lot of films, so I'm in this group as the audience. Right? So just thinking about some audience intended messages sent out. Okay. There's a video here that I will let you watch, but it's related to how do you pay attention to the audience and how do you respond? And some of that has to do with how your body is set up, how you're responding to and listening to what your client is telling you about, and when you talk to the audience as a research, what is the best way of responding to them and getting all the information that you need. So it's a nice video. One of the questions that you might ask on a regular basis is just something simple like, how do we work with you? How do we create this? How do we work together on that? In the defining stage, you think about what kind of material we have to gather, what's been done before, what would you need to know in order to create this problem. You need to know a little about the details about when it's due and things like that. But you also need to know who the audience is. You need to know the timeline that they have. How long is it going to be out sharing the message with the public or whoever it's for? So what would you need to know? Here's an example that I'm going to use quickly for each of these different components, but how would this work for a cookout? Well, some of it has to do in the defining stage of discovering and planning and just kind of thinking, right? So here's some more of those questions. Again, it might be kind of a repeat, but just thinking about it for that. And the reason I was mentioning that cookout is you're going to see that some more is, what is the message? What are we trying to do? Who's the audience? It's going to be different. It's going to be different than somebody who has that app for getting movie tickets. Who's the competition? What else is happening on this day and that day? And what do you want people to do if they're at a cookout and you want them to come? Where are they coming? How can they let you know? What do they need to bring, etc.? So some questions to ask as you're coming along with a plan. And a lot of this is put together in what's called a design brief. And we're going to do this at a different time. But the design brief is basically it's an agreement between the designer and the client. And it says, here's our timeline, here's what we're making, here's what the client needs to provide, here's what the designer is going to provide back, all of that. And it's kind of a way for you to safely and technically legally, I would say, respond to each other, and it's your contract between the two, right? So make sure you get paid, make sure they get what they need. The design brief, again, is that strategic plan. It's a written document and in something you can hold in your hands that you agree with the client. You'll use that in other projects. I'm just highlighting it now for what it is because it gets you going into coming up with ideas, and that leads you into the second step. All right. So as you're thinking about that design brief, how would this work for a cookout? Might start thinking about as we're transitioning into the ideation stage. Okay. And in the ideation stage, we're taking this idea and we're building upon it. Okay. So if it's a cookout, it might be something specific that we really want to highlight. If it's 4th of July, maybe that. Or if it is something among the graduation, that's the underlying concept with that. So you kind of come up with that and work. And this concept is that underlying application of what we're going to create, the idea. It's a little bit more abstract thing, right? We're going to celebrate these two getting married. We're going to come together and look at, here's why this young child has had a birthday or whatever. Who knows? Just some real generic ideas, okay? So as you're coming up with concept generation, the direction that we're going, we have preparation, you're doing some research, you're doing some thinking, and then we let it set. And I've found that incubation is really helpful. So I'll talk as we go along about what we are working on with this next project, and let it sit. And you never know what you're going to start to pay attention to things differently around you. Your semi-conscious does work in that way. It's pretty fascinating. Then we get into some ideas about, okay, here's my concept, here's my understanding. What direction can I go? What might inspire me? What might work? What might be usable? And then we get some feedback as we go. Okay, so it's just another structure of this generation of how we come up with ideas. Okay. So for this cookout, we might just look at anything and everything that comes through the word cookout. It might be materials that the chef uses. It might be what you eat and what goes on what you eat, what you drink, what you can do on the side if you're waiting for food to get done. A lot of little things. So this kind of idea generation, anything and everything. We're gathering all these different ideas, coming up with a concept from here. Okay. So we're going to do that with our first project, and we're going to do that in class too, just kind of exploring that. As we're thinking and continuing about this, then we take all those little ideas and work into a visual form. Okay. And the first part of that are thumbnails. It is quantity, not quality. They're quick, they're small, they're fast, they are in the right proportions, but they're just really rough. And I mean, you'll see what the next one is roughs, but thumbnails are quick, they're fast, and they're just getting your ideas. And and for me, what it is connecting your hand to your mind and just sketching. Okay, so quantity, not quality, and moving along. Okay, and thumbnails might look something like this. We've looked at, and if you need to refresh, we've looked at some ways that we can create thumbnails in Sketch with lines, with shapes. How do we draw figures? How do we include text? What do we need to include? But thumbnails can look like that. They can be a little more detailed. They can be really fine. There's a lot of variation with these, but they're not. You can see the range here. That's what I mean. You don't have to be the world's best illustrator to create them. The city logo is actually created on a napkin. That's kind of the backstory with that, and something that's developed some recognition of it, among other things. But it was developed on a napkin. You can use what you need, but hopefully we'll be able to use your sketchbooks as we go. Okay. So as long as you're looking at quantity, not quality, you're not necessarily sharing those with your client. It doesn't have to be in the world's best sketchbook, but putting it in context, putting it in format of what we are. So on the left, we might have these actual t-shirts. Like, put it in the context that we need to be in. Okay. So just some ideas. You can make notes as you're working. You can use color as you're working, but just your thumbnails can be just you're connecting your mind to your hand as you go. And we look at variation with that. So we do it on the right here. You see these spreads. That's a left and a right side of a magazine or a book, and we have something on the left, something on the right, and we can go from there. And they're different focal point, different use of space, different use of line, etc. Okay. So it's a little, if this is for a coffee shop, how many different ways could we show a cup of coffee? How many different ways could we show the things that you add on to the coffee or the tea or the snacks or the tools that you use to make it? Even if you are in multimedia and thinking about time-based work, you're still working in thumbnails, essentially. You're sketching out how do you plan how your time is going to be used. Again, it's with variety. So business cards, just thinking about, I could use this symbol, I can use that symbol, I can make this the focal point, that the focal point, I can use it and over here and over here and over here. I can rotate it. You have a lot of variety in the design development in your thumbnails. Again, it's just using lines, shapes, the basics, and then we start to filter it from there. Okay, so how could this work for a cookout? Well, I could show, if I wanted to think about maybe a grill, I could show a grill from the top, I could show it from the side, I could show it from 3/4, I can show it from the bottom, I can explore. Those are 4 different ways of showing thumbnails of the actual grill. I could look at a different approach being text. How many different ways could I sketch the word cookout? Once I get those kind of going, I go into the next stage. So it's thumbnails and then roughs. And those are often full-sized. We combine things from our thumbnails and we go from there, the refinement. So that's our second stage. Here we put them even more in context. So I'm showing, and here's what we look at is different sketches, different roughs per concept. So if I come up with 3 different ideas, there's actually 6 on this page, 6 different ideas. 3 ideas related to black and white charcoal drawing from the top with the text here, the text there, applying a plane that way. The second one, looking at more of the grill. That's a different concept, and that's kind of one of the hard things to do, is like, how many different ways could I sketch a grill? Well, lower left corner, bottom, etc., and kind of playing with that. That's one idea. Second, completely different idea is this showing the grill from the outside. Another one is looking at a stamp of beef, and how could I show that? Different concept in a rough. And then the fourth one could be a picnic theme. So this has 12 different roughs. It's not just checking off, oh, I need to have 12 roughs. No, it's exploring, here's some variety with my approaches. This concept, picnic theme, how many different ways could I show a picnic theme? How many different ways could I show a beef stamp or brand, something like that? And then adding notes. Oh yeah, add a border, what colors would I use? Big graphic, what do I need? Is it an illustration? Is it a photograph? All kinds of things like that. Okay. The last part is comps. And comps are what we share with the client. That's part one of a comp, is that's what we share. We don't show thumbnails. We generally do not show roughs. 3 different concepts. So it might be one, the grill from the top. Second one would be the beef. And the third one might be the picnic. Showing those different, here's approach 1, here's approach 2, here's approach 3. Not, here are 3 versions of the idea of a cookout. Right? We go along, it's 3 different concepts, not variations of one. Whereas if you go back here real quick, the picnic theme, the last one here on the bottom, I have 1, 2, 3 variations of the same theme or the same concept, but I'm not going. That's not it. I have to show more. Okay. Comps are often where we end. It's what we do on the computer. The first 2, thumbnails and roughs, are done by hand in your sketchbook. Okay, and then we go from there and build using the tools that we need. We create the mock-up. If it's a poster, we do that. If it's a book, we do the cover. If it is packaging, we do the packaging at that part. Okay, so thinking about then, that's kind of the way where we stop. What we would do after that is actually send it to the printer and publish it, etc. Okay, so that's the execute part of it. It's the final output of what you turn in for our class, and craftsmanship matters. So how it's sketched, or sorry, how it's trimmed, how it's put together, all of that. Okay, so again, looking at defining a problem, looking at some of our understanding of what it is we are doing, the design brief, what's our goal, what's our intention, what are we going to put out. Ideation, building off the brainstorming, that's the first part, then thumbnails, and then roughs. We're going to use all of those for this next step up. Then we develop it and get on the computer and make the prototype, the visual, the finalized idea, get some feedback on it, send it off to print, publish it online or social media, and get some feedback. How many people visited the website because of that? All right, so we'll keep going off of this, and we're going to use this on the next project and the ones after that.